Okay, so the 21st installment to the MCU in chronological order is Ant-Man and Wasp, the sequel to the first Ant-Man movie and follow-up to Captain America Civil War, which follows the tale of Scott Lang and what happened to him post-Civil War. Okay, so the overall premise of this movie is Ant-Man and Wasp, along with Hank Pym, teaming up to try and find Janet Van Dyne, who is stuck in the quantum realm, while all the while they have to deal with threats from a character named Ghost, and another character named Sonny Birch, who is a black market arms dealer. Okay, so that's the overall premise of the Ant-Man and Wasp. Let's talk about it. Overall, now, before I talk about the movie, let's talk about how this movie fits into the MCU chronologically. So, this movie takes place concurrently with the events of Avengers Infinity War. So, realistically, you could watch this movie before you watch Infinity War, and you can look at the mid-credit scene as like this ominous thing that you don't know what happens. Then you watch Infinity War to see exactly what that means, or you can watch this movie in between Infinity War and Endgame. Like there's two different ways to watch this movie where it's not going to ruin the overall impact. If you watch it before Infinity War, this feeling of, oh my god, what just happened. And then when you watch Infinity War, it makes the mid-credit scene actually heightens the ominous tone of that mid-credit scene in this movie. Now, if you watch it in between, you're pretty much getting the fallout. The mid-credit scene is just a continuation of what happened after Infinity War, and then segueing into Endgame. So pretty much, Ant-Man and Wasp can be viewed in two different ways. It can be either before or in between. Either way is fine, since the most of the story is independent from what happens from Infinity War, as it takes place in San Francisco, so it's much more isolated. All right. So with all that being said, let's talk about this movie. Overall, I think Ant-Man 2 is actually a lot of fun. All right. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's talk about Ant-Man and Wasp. So overall thoughts on this film? I like it. I like this movie on the same level as I did the first movie. The Ant-Man movies are not about having these complex plots or like these end of the world type of situations. They're very small scale, and their stories are more personal. Like the first Ant-Man movie is all about being a heist movie. This movie is all about trying to find Janet Van Dyne, who is stuck in the quantum realm, and bringing her back. And it's not really all that complex. Like it does have a lot of things going on in it, especially that this movie has two villains that you got to deal with the character of Sonny Birch, who is a black market arms dealer, and you have this character called Ghost, who has a condition where she's going in and out of phasing, and she's trying to find a cure to pretty much prevent her from being ripped apart. So like, it does have a lot of like added meat to it. Some of it is good, and some of it is not really, and some of it is executed decently, but could have been explored much better. But for the overall gist of this movie, it fits the overall tone that Peyton Reed was going for, which is just to be a light-hearted, just comedic superhero action movie with some serious moments peppered all throughout. So with all that being said, let's go over the positives and let's go over the negatives. So the positives: the cast in this movie, top notch. Paul Rudd, you can't go wrong with him as Scott Lang / the Ant-Man. I actually think he's much more funnier in this movie than he was in the second movie. Some of my favorite Ant-Man / Scott Lang bits are in this movie. Like there's this scene where he gets shrunk down to the size of a kid and he's running around an elementary school. I think that stuff's absolutely hilarious. I love the interactions that he has with Hank. I love their chemistry in the first movie, and I like it in this movie. The same goes for his interactions with his friends Louise, Kurt, and Ti. They now have their own security business called XCon. I like the bantering and camaraderie between the four of them. Their dynamic works for me, and I like it a lot. This is like Ant-Man's human. This is like Ant-Man's little Avengers team, and it works for me. Like they have good dynamics and good chemistry with one another. And of course, you can't go wrong with Angevine Lilly as the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne the Wasp. I like her. I liked her in the first movie. In this movie, she finally gets to don the Wasp costume, and this is pretty much a team-up movie of the Ant-Man and Wasp, obviously. And they do have a lot of fun scenes together. And that romance that was established in the first Ant-Man movie gets more expanded upon and more explored a little bit in this movie. So I got no complaints about that either. So in terms of the character interactions that Scott Lang has, it's all good stuff. His story is basically that he's under house arrest after the events of Civil War, and he has this running joke where he's constantly trying to trick the FBI, particularly that of Jimmy Woo, that he's still in his house and not leaving his house, or else he'll be going to jail because of that. So I thought that stuff got some good comedic moments. The stuff with his daughter Cassie is still very sweet and touching. I especially like the opening scene where they're going to like this makeshift maze that Scott created since he's in house arrest. I thought that was fun. That was really cool. Like Scott, like I said, Scott has a lot of fun moments in this movie, and you can't go wrong with that. Now we've talked about Hope Van Dyne. Now, I think one of the biggest complaints about the Ant-Man and Wasp as a movie is that it's more Hope-centered and not Scott-centered. And to an extent, I understand where you're coming from, but you also got to remember that this plot is about finding Janet Van Dyne. So it kind of makes more sense that it's more of a Hank and Hope story than it is a Scott Lang story. That doesn't mean Scott Lang's an afterthought in his whole movie, because he's not. He plays a vital role in helping Hope and Hank find Janet because he has more experience going into the quantum realm, because he actually survived it and found a way out of it. But yeah, this is more or less more of a Hope story as she's on a quest to find her mother. However, Hope doesn't overshadow Scott. They're on equal level playing field, so like they're each other's equal essentially. So I don't have any complaints, and I do like Hope as a character because she evolved more. Now she's going into her superhero phase. I do like how she has a little bit of friction with Scott because he went to Germany to fight the Avengers, and he forgot to, and he didn't think to have Hope join him. And I like the little teaser how Hope would have said that if she would have came with Scott, then he would have been able to escape without going to jail. So I like that stuff. That's like nice little character moments here and there between Hope and Scott. I always thought Paul Rudd and Divine Lily had decent on-screen chemistry from that first movie, and it gets expanded upon more in this movie, so I don't have no complaints. I also like how the relationship between Hope and Hank is more expanded upon in this. These two have finally made amends, and they're now acting like a father and daughter team, and I like it. Michael Douglas. You can't go wrong with Michael Douglas just in general as an actor. The man is good. And I like his portrayal of Hank Pym. I like how he has like that grouchy, sarcastic old man type of humor to him. And it works when he's interacting with Scott, and it works when he's interacting with Hope. It's good stuff. I like it a lot. Now, in terms of the new additions, you have Hannah, what's her name? I can't remember the actress's name. Yeah, you have Hannah John Kamen, who plays the character of Ava Starr / Ghost. She's the overarching villain of this movie. And her whole thing is that she was caught in a lab accident, and her parents died, but it also did something to her body where she goes in and out of phasing. And if she doesn't find a cure, then her body's going to be ripped apart and she's going to basically fade away into existence. As a villain, I thought Ghost was okay. She's nothing really all that spectacular. The movie more or less made her more sympathetic because of her backstory, and that's pretty much it. I won't say she does anything overly villainous. She's mostly just trying to survive, and that's basically it. Ghost as a villain is kind of throwaway and kind of forgettable, because the overarching, the real villain is really Sonny Birch, as opposed to Ghost. Ghost is more of a tragic villain who, at the end of the movie, kind of sort of gets redeemed at the end. So yeah, in terms of her character arc, Ghost is okay. The best aspect of Ghost as a character is her relationship with Ben Foster, played by Lawrence Fishburne. I think the character of Ben Foster has the potential to be absolutely more than what it really was in this movie, especially since he and Hank have a fractured relationship, which is not really a bit of a shock because Hank has a lot of fractured relationships. He had a fractured relationship with Darren Cross, and he eventually became the Yellow Jacket and tried to kill Hank. He had a fractured relationship with his daughter because of what happened to Janet. But eventually, he made amends with Hope. But in this one, yeah, Frank and Ben have a fractured relationship because Hank always undermined Ben, and eventually Ben had enough and just left Hank high and dry. I actually like these scenes. The very few scenes we get of Michael Douglas and Lawrence Fishburne acting off one another made me want to know more about their story and more about the events that led to them having a fallout. Because Ben played a vital role with Hank in terms of the early days, because I think they worked on Project Goliath, in which Ant-Man turns into a giant man near the end of the movie, the same way he did in Civil War. Ben Foster had a role in developing that formula. And he also plays a role in giving Hank and giving Hank, Scott, and Hope the idea of how they can bring Janet back from the quantum realm. So Ben Foster does play a vital role, but I would like to see more of the relationship between him and Hank more explored. And I would actually like to have this more of a scene of them making amends and becoming allies again. Also, on the same token, it's revealed that Ben has basically been looking after Ava ever since she was a kid, kind of like helping her try to find a way of a cure. I actually like that idea of a father-daughter concept between Ben and Ava. I don't think it was fully explored enough, but I like the idea of it. Hopefully, Ben Foster returns in Thunderbolts, and we do get more of an exploration with Ghost, because Ghost is supposed to return in that movie as well. Yeah, everyone forgot about who Ghost was until she was announced for Thunderbolts. That's when everyone was like, "Who the hell's Ghost?" And they remember, "Oh wait, she was an Ant-Man." Yeah, like that. That's not a slight on Hannah Jo Kamen as an actress. That's just because her character is not that interesting, and all the interesting aspects of her character are more or less face value. Like the more interesting part of her character to me is the relationship that she has with Ben Foster, which could have been explored much, much more, and you could have paralleled that with the relationship between Hope and Hank. But what we got was fine. Like you can tell that Ben deeply cares for Ava, but he's not willing to cross lines that Ava's willing to cross. And what really sold it to me is when Ava makes a threat to go over to Scott's daughter, and Ben's like, "No, that's not happening." He really stands his ground with that, and Ava reluctantly, has to follow it, because if he wants this man's help, he's not going to attack a little kid just to save a life. So it kind of makes Ben into a respectable character, which is what he is. Like, yes, he's helping a fugitive, but he's doing it for a good cause. And I also like how they gave Ava a little bit oomph, because of her powers and what she's capable of doing. She was pretty much used and trained by Shield. Of course, this is when Shield was was under the influence of Hydra. So she was basically an undercover Hydra operative when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. So that was okay. That was pretty cool. And she does have some entertaining fight scenes with the Ant-Man and Wasp. I ain't gonna lie. They're nothing groundbreaking or anything like that, but they're not bad. For what this movie has to offer, they're not bad at all. To me, the real villain in this movie is really Walton Goggins as the character of Sonny Burch, who is this black market arms dealer who wants to have quantum technology so that way he can sell it and make a profit out of it. Now, as an overall villain, there's nothing really to the character of Sonny Burch. Pretty much all of Sonny Burch's charisma comes from Walton Goggins, because I like Walton Goggins as an actor, and he makes Sonny Burch stand out because of that. And I just like the little interactions that he has with the main characters and stuff like that. Like, he's really a throwaway villain, kind of like Ghost. There's nothing really all to him. Say he's just an evil businessman type of deal. But I do like how it's actually Scott's friends who pretty much stop Sonny Burch and his goons. And I like the whole running joke of one of his goons having truth serum, but constantly keeps denying it. And I like the payoff where Burch and his men are pretty much, ratting themselves out to the cops, and one of the guys finally convinces himself that, wow, what I did have was truth serum. So that was a nice payoff to a joke that was established early on in the movie. In terms of the action sequences and the direction, I like Peyton Reed as a filmmaker. He's really good at directing comedy, and he does the comedy in this movie really, really well. Though I think there are certain times where the comedy undercuts some dramatic scenes. For example, there's this one scene where Ant-Man and Wasp are infiltrating Ghost's house, where she's in like a sleep recovery, and eventually she gets woken up, and she has Hank, Hope, and Scott tied to chairs. And Ben is giving the speech, but it keeps getting interrupted by a phone call from Cassie. Like, you're kind of undercutting the dramatic moments of this scene where you're supposed to be building up Ben and Ghost as, kind of pseudo threats to the trio, but you keep undermining it with a joke. And I wasn't really too thrilled about that. But to this movie's credit, not every scene is undercut with a joke. Like when Hank goes into the quantum realm and finally brings, Janet back, who's played by Michelle Pfeiffer. The scene is played totally straight with nothing jokey undercutting it. Actually, to this movie's credit, from the second Janet comes back from the quantum realm, the next 5 minutes after that is played mostly straight, mostly serious, with no humor undercutting it. And whatever humor does undercut it, it's more or less subtle and not in your face. So I appreciate that, and I like that. Speaking of Michelle Pfeiffer, even though she's not in this movie, her character does play a vital role because she helps, the trio find her when Hank goes to the quantum realm. And it's fun seeing Michelle Pfeiffer, and it's fun seeing Michelle Pfeiffer. I always have a soft spot for Michelle Pfeiffer. She's my Catwoman. But Michelle Pfeiffer's crowning scene is the prologue of this movie, where we actually see the adventure of her and Hank trying to stop this missile and her going subatomic and going into the quantum realm. Like, her best moment is the opening prologue of this movie before the actual movie starts. So I like that stuff. And I do like the reunion between Hope and Janet, and Janet and Hank. That's really emotional and powerful stuff, because it really is 30 years in the making that this woman who was thought to have been dead has finally been found. And I also like how she plays a role in pretty much, helping Ghost, helping Ava. Like, Ava was almost about to kill her, but because Janet has been in the quantum realm for so long, she absorbed like its power and its essence, and she was able to take, Ghost's phasing powers away. For how long, we don't know. It's kind of left into a mystery. But that pretty much starts Ghost's redemption, road to redemption, basically. So I thought that stuff was handled fairly decently as well. Now, when I get to my negatives, yeah, this movie is not all the way perfect. Specifically, the characters of Bobby Cannavale's character and Judy Greer, their characters their characters are mostly just wasted in this movie. Because I think Paxton could have played a good role in being part of Ant-Man's little crew, since he's a cop. So he like, the movie had a missed opportunity to have Paxton kind of like hide the fact that Scott's been leaving his house while he's under house arrest. Instead, he's just there just to be a joke. Like, every time we see Paxton, he just hugs Scott, and that's pretty much it. Like, he's pretty much wasted. Like, in the first movie, he was used relatively well. In this one, he's not used well at all. And Judy Greer, she's a good actress, but she's just there just to act like Scott's ex-wife and Cassie's mom. At least Scott does have a good relationship with his ex-wife and with Paxton, so it is what it is. But they could have done so much more with those characters. And like I said, some of the jokes in this movie land, and some of the jokes in this movie don't land. But that's just what's typical of Marvel, is that sometimes they'll have a joke that's really funny, and then they'll run it into the ground, or it's not funny anymore. And then you have a movie like this, which actually does have good setup jokes and have decent payoffs to those jokes as well. So I like that stuff. And like I said, even though I don't mind the characters of Ghost and Sonny Birch, they're overall relatively underutilized and don't really add much to the overall story, to be honest with you. So I'm going to classify them as negatives as well. Though Sonny Birch is set to return for the Armored Wars TV show, so maybe they have a chance to make him more of a character and not make him throwaway. Maybe have him be more vital to that show, since he's already set up as being a black market arms dealer type of dude. And yeah, even though I do like the action sequences in this movie, they're not really all that great. They're kind of forgettable. But the third act is a lot of fun when Scott Lang goes into giant man mode and goes rampaging through San Francisco. And I like the whole thing of Jimmy Woo thinking he's got Scott dead to rights, but he doesn't. And they're able to trick Jimmy Woo in a very clever way, which I don't mind at all. So yeah, overall, I think Ant-Man and Wasp is a very fun movie. And I do like the mid-credit scene that it pretty much sets up Endgame, where Scott goes into the quantum realm to try and take some energy so that way they can give it to Ghost, and then poof, he gets trapped in the quantum realm because Hank, Janet, and Hope have been dusted by the snap, which sets up Scott being trapped in the quantum realm to him eventually leaving once we get to Endgame. But I like the ominousness of it. Okay, so with all that being said, I'm going to give Ant-Man and Wasp a solid 7 out of 10. I like it on the same par as the first Ant-Man movie. It's a lot of fun. It's not perfect by any means necessary, but it's a good palate cleanser and a good in-between till you get to the emotional heaviness that is Endgame. So in the overall grand scheme of things, the Ant-Man and Wasp is a throwaway story, but it mostly just focuses on Scott Lang's fallout from Civil War and puts him on his quest that eventually gets him to where he is in Endgame. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for the Ant-Man and Wasp. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.